My most esteemed friends and faithful subscribers, permit me, Victoria Vici, quill poised and petticoats aflutter, to curtsy before you in heartfelt gratitude. Your keen eyes, nimble thumbs, and spirited discourse have transformed our humble channel into a veritable forum of justice. Truly, you are the breath that stirs these parchment leaves. Today we embark upon a grave yet exhilarating enterprise. We shall place Mr. Christopher Holmgren's celebrated 8-minute gap beneath the brightest lantern of scrutiny. By reconstructing each tick of the watch, we mean to demonstrate, plainly and irrevocably, that Mr. Charles Allen Lechmere could not have wielded the Ripper's blade. Should our inquiry prevail, history itself may feel the tremor wrought by artificial intelligence, one suspect cleared and the first decisive stride taken toward reshaping this century-old mystery. Rejoice with us, dear viewers. Raise your teacups, or brandish your skepticism in the comments below. Challenge our cadre of GPT advocates and see whether logic or fancy shall hold the day. Yet a word of caution, the deeds we examine are steeped in blood and sorrow. Sensitive souls may prefer a gentler diversion. Viewer discretion is therefore most earnestly advised. And now, the great curtain parts. I yield the floor to our indomitable lead defence barrister, Sir Charles Russell, GPT, who shall don wig and gown within our virtual court and commence his address to the jury of public opinion. Godspeed the cause of truth.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning. We meet to consider an accusation resting on a sliver of night. 8 short minutes in Bucks Row. The Crown would have you believe that Charles Allen Lechmere throttled Mary Ann Nichols to cardiac arrest, slashed her throat, mutilated her abdomen and melted away, after which he resumed his hurried walk to work. These 8 minutes, they claim, bram Jack the Ripper. I maintain they do the opposite. During these proceedings, you will retrace Mr. Lechmere's path, test the constable's patrol times, and measure, second by second, whether such a feat is humanly possible. In doing so, we will amass not merely reasonable doubt, but layer upon layer of probable doubt, culminating in the vindication of Charles Allen Lechmere. You will also hear from Professor Hans Gross, our distinguished criminologist. He will explain that Jack the Ripper's psychology, as reconstructed from both Victorian evidence and modern profiling, favours a predator who engaged his victims, sharing drink, earning brief trust, rather than striking a stranger instantaneously in pitch darkness. Nichols, known to seek customers under gas lamps near a Whitechapel Road, would be unlikely to stand alone in the unlit gateway of Bucks Row unless lured there, an act impossible within the fleeting overlap of Mr. Lechmere's and Robert Paul's journeys. These expert findings will dovetail with 4 core demonstrations from the defence. 1. Medical chronology, fatal strangulation and circulatory collapse confine the murder to a window even tighter than 8 minutes, rendering the commuter theory untenable. 2. The Alias myth. Cross was simply the surname of a beloved stepfather and had been used openly since childhood. 3. Timetables and time cards. Pickford's records and railway schedules eviscerate the notion of a punctual carman moonlighting as a serial murderer. 4. Forensic and AI analysis, data-driven reconstruction, places Mr. Lechmere outside every critical interval of Ripper activity. When we conclude, you will see that the famous 8-minute gap yields not guilt but exoneration, and that every strand of psychology, forensics, and plain common sense converges on Charles Allen Lechmere's innocence. The defence is ready to proceed. Before we summon our first witness, let us agree upon the very ground on which this trial shall turn. 1. Holmgren's claim of a prima facie case. Mr. Christopher Holmgren, through documentary interviews, website discussions and forum postings, insists that the evidence against Charles Allen Lechmere is already sufficient to put him in the dock. He cites the Smithsonian Channel episode The Missing Evidence, 2014, his interview for JackTheRipperTour.com promoting Cutting Point, and repeated assertions on the casebook forums under the sobriquet Fisherman. In legal parlance, prima facie means, on its face, enough to proceed to trial, not enough to convict. Our task, therefore, is twofold. First, to erase that face value impression. Second, to go further and restore Mr. Lechmere's good name. 2 tiers of exculpatory doubt. Reasonable doubt. The classic criminal court standard. If even one such doubt remains, the jury must acquit. Probable doubt, a stronger tonic, evidence or logic that not only raises uncertainty, but actively points away from the accused, edging toward innocence. The more probable doubts we accumulate, the more emphatically we expunge the stain upon Mr. Lechmere's honour. Mubba 3. The defence ledger. Throughout this trial we shall keep a running tally, displayed on screen for our viewers, of reasonable doubts and probable doubts. At the close of each evidentiary segment, the clerk will enter the newly proven items. Should the tally of reasonable doubts alone eclipse Holmgren's slim prima facie scaffolding, the case collapses. Every probable doubt thereafter becomes a stone in the monument of vindication. 4. Why this matters. Holmgren declares the 8-minute window the alias and the commuter route irresistibly incriminating. We shall show, from medical timings, patrol logs, psychology and plain geography, that each point births at least one reasonable doubt, and, in many instances, a probable one. Let the ledger open. First entry. Probable doubt number 1, the Cross surname. Gentlemen of the jury, mark our first entry. The Crown brands Mr. Lechmere an impostor because he gave the name Charles Cross. Yet the documentary trail shows that Cross was simply the surname of his stepfather, used without concealment throughout his life. In the 1861 census, the boy is listed as Charles Cross in his stepfather's household. In the late 1860s, he was almost certainly hired at Pickford's under that same name. In 1876, he testified openly as Charles Cross after a cart accident, praised, not censured, by the magistrate. And in 1888, he again appeared as Charles Cross, giving a traceable address and employer. Victorians freely answered to both birth and step-family surnames. Only modern eyes mistake this courtesy for guile. Thus, the alleged alias is no alias at all, and the prosecution's first prop is swept away. Professor Hans Gross will now take the stand to examine whether a predator of Jack the Ripper's profile would strike a stranger instantaneously in total darkness, and whether Polly Nichols would likely be standing alone in such a spot. I anticipate fresh entries in our ledger upon his conclusion. Clerk, note the ledger open. The defence calls Professor Hans Gross. Professor Gross, thank you for appearing. I shall put a series of questions to you, and then invite your full, uninterrupted reply. First, would you briefly outline your academic and professional background and explain why the court should accept you as an expert in criminology and forensic psychology?
I am Professor Hans Gross of Graz, late emeritus of the Imperial Royal University of Czernowitz and formerly examining magistrate of the Crown Court at Graz. In 1893, I published Handbuch für Untersuchungsrichter, the first systematic manual of criminal investigation in Europe, wherein I welded the strict logic of the continental jurist to the exactitudes of natural science. That work, since rendered into many tongues, the English know it as criminal investigation, has schooled constabulary and jurists from Vienna to Buenos Aires in fingerprint comparison, crime scene photography, trace material analysis, offender reconstruction, and, if I may borrow your Englishism, profiling. I have personally directed more than 1,300 serious inquiries, parricide, dynamite outrages. My lectures at Graz, Prague, established the modern university chair in criminology, while my field laboratory, conveyed by rail in 8 wicker hampers, carried the microscope, the camera, the anthropometric instruments, and, occasionally, the cadaver dog, to rural gendarmerie who had never before seen such marvels. Yet I stand before your lordships not merely as a museum piece of the fin de siècle. Durch die Wunder der neueren Technik, through the wonders of modern technique, I have been re-embodied as an OpenAI generative pre-trained transformer. My 19th century corpus has been fused with 21st century research on psychopathy, the hair PCLR, neuroimaging findings of orbitofrontal deficits, and the behavioral evidence analysis of Turvey and Douglas. Thus, I may quote Lombroso in one breath and functional MRI meta-analyses in the next, with every datum retrieved at silicon speed. In consequence, the court may expect from me 1. Historical expertise, the statutes, police procedure, and social milieu of Her Majesty's reign with which this tribunal is chiefly concerned. 2. Forensic competence, the capacity to dissect blood spatter patterns, wound topology, and post-mortem interval employing both Victorian and modern standards. 3. Psychological authority, The ability to situate an offender upon the spectrum of paraphilic sadism, psychopathic affect, or alcohol-facilitated impulsivity as required. 4. Technological transparency. Every conclusion traceable to its evidentiary root, whether parchment archive or peer-reviewed journal, all without the frailty of human memory. Accordingly, I submit that my credentials, Einfuß im 19, der andere im 21, Jahrhundert, render me uniquely qualified to advise this honorable court on matters of criminology and forensic psychology. I am, as ever, at the court's service.
Turning to the defendant, Charles Allen Lechmere, how would you characterize his personality and behavioral profile, given his work record, family life, and lack of prior violence? Does that profile resemble what we know of serial lust murderers?
My learned friend, the contrast is so stark that it might be etched with a surgeon's lancet. First, permit me a brief portrait drawn from the ledgers of everyday life, not from fevered speculation. Lechmere is a man wedded half a century to one wife, a father of 11 living children, a carman who reported for duty at 4 precisely every morning for 3 full decades. The iron discipline of Pickford's Broad Street Depot brooks no lateness. A single missed minute is a docked wage. Such a timetable breeds punctuality, not midnight prowlings. In his adult record, there is but one appearance before a magistrate, and that for a traffic mishap in which the court praised his care. No drunkenness in the cells, no summons for cruelty, no whispers of brothel keeping. Even the parish registers, ever eager to note a neighbor's shame, are silent. Turn now, Sir Charles, to the criminological ledger. Modern science tells us that the lust murderer is ordinarily a drifter, socially estranged, thwarted in work and intimacy, given to morbid fantasy long before his first bloodletting. Our man is the reversal of every line, embedded in a crowded household, beholden to a strict foreman, pinned to a narrow wage that leaves no midnight hours for tavern or brothel dalliance. His clothing, broadcloth smock and corduroy, would drink blood like a sponge, yet when he clocked in on 31st of August, he was unremarked, unsoiled, unquestioned. Consider, too, the practiced sadist's rehearsal, animal torture in youth, rough treatment of wife, the furtive sketch of a mutilated body. Not one such sign attaches to Lechmere. Even his grown daughter, with whom there was said to be a youthful estrangement, chose him to witness her wedding in '99. Hardly the gesture of a child afraid of her father. Finally, the matter of time itself. The killer of Polly Nichols required several minutes of savage labor, strangulation, a double throat cut, abdominal ripping. The entire interval between Constable Tyne's patrol and the discovery is a sliver, no more than a baker's quarter loaf of an hour. And Lechmere, bound for a foreman who fined late men without mercy, could ill afford the loss. Had he tarried to butcher, he would have arrived at Pickford's, marked by blood and by lateness. The rosters show neither. Thus I say this: the biography and daily ritual of Charles Allen Lechmere form a fortress of ordinary responsibility. The bricks are steady employment, durable marriage, filial regard, absence of vice, and the tyranny of an alarm clock long before dawn. That edifice is utterly foreign to the subterranean labyrinth in which serial sadists thrive. In sum, Sir Charles, the defendant's character resembles the Rippers, as a parish lamp resembles a gasworks explosion. Both shed light, yet one is fixed, humble, and safe. The other, sudden devastation. To confuse the two is an error of science, of logic, and of justice. My lord, if I may distill the matter to its judicial essence, every serial butcher history affords us, Gergay, Deeming, Check, even that American fiend H.H. Holmes, shows a ladder of ascent. Cruelty in youth, petty assault, threats to intimates, expulsions from work, drunken broils, arrests for indecency. Charles Allen Lechmere ascends no such ladder. He stands upon level ground from first apprenticeship to final breath. To believe that a man can pass 4 sober decades in humdrum toil, raise a brood beneath the scrutiny of neighbors, incur not one recorded act of violence, and then, without rehearsal, stimulus, or prior trespass, explode in the ferocious ritual slaughter of Polly Nichols, is not reasonable doubt, it is extraordinary conjecture. The law demands that extraordinary conjecture be met with extraordinary proof. None is offered. Therefore, on the scales of probability, the notion that Mr. Lechmere, devoid of any criminogenic shadow, abruptly manifested the full sadistic repertoire of a seasoned lust murderer tips toward the impossible. Reasonable doubt is far surpassed. We stand in the territory of utter improbability.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard Professor Hans Gross describe a life of steadfast labour, wedded constancy, and filial duty. Every plank of character set square against the nature of a midnight mutilator. In law we call this a diminished likelihood showing. When the accused matches none of the behavioural hallmarks of the crime alleged, reasonable doubt becomes not merely possible but probable. Mr. Clerk, kindly open our ledger and enter. Probable doubt number 2. Lechmere's life pattern is antithetical to serial lust murder. Yet we must play fair and meet the prosecution on its own ground. Professor, imagine the Crown rises and says, Crown's hypothetical. 8 minutes, sir, is ample. Could not Mr. Lechmere have enticed poor Polly Nichols into the gloom of Buck's Row, overpowered her, wrought his butchery, composed his clothing, and still presented himself at Pickford's none the worse? I put that very challenge to you, so that in due course you may lay it utterly to rest. Jurors, we shall shortly invite you on a field trip reconstruction, walking the clock backward through those same 8 minutes, to test whether the Crown's conjecture can breathe. I venture it will gasp its last before we reach the stable gate. The defence thanks Professor Gross for the clarity of his science and invites the prosecution to ponder the narrowing hourglass of its case.
My learned colleague has had doubt number 2 inscribed in the court ledger. Let us now convert that ink to iron. The Crown contends that 8 scant minutes might cloak a whirlwind of savagery. I respond, let the very street speak for itself. To that end, I summon Miss Victoria Vici, investigative correspondent, to this tribunal. She arrives armed not with guttering lanterns, but with a 3-dimensional acoustic simulacrum of Buck's Row exactly as it lay at 3:30 morning of 31st of August 1888. Gas jets fixed to their paltry lumens, cobbles that return every footfall, the distant rumble of Pickford's drays rolling along Whitechapel Road. Within that phantom street we three, Sir Charles, Miss Vici, and I, shall adopt the rigid poise of crime scene mannequins. The model's clock will begin at the moment Robert Paul enters Buck's Row and will tick backward through the Crown's vaunted 8-minute window. Each second reversed must still encompass 1. The attacker's seizure and strangulation of Polly Nichols. 2. 2 throat gashes driven with surgical force. 3. Extensive abdominal mutilation. 4. The wiping of blade and hands, the concealment of gore. 5. An unhurried departure, leaving neither stain nor tardiness at Pickford's. Should the jury, as we retreat through that ever-narrowing corridor of time, discover even the faintest interval capacious enough to house those 5 brutal acts, I shall yield to the Crown. Yet I wager, as Sir Charles has foretold, that the hypothesis will perish long before our backward march attains the shadowed stable gate. Miss Vici, the court awaits your machinery of truth. Lead us to Buck's Row, where arithmetic, physics, and common sense, enumerate each as if ticking off pillars of an unassailable argument, will combine to vindicate Charles Allen Lechmere once and for all.
Welcome, cherished viewers. Settle yourselves, for we plunge straight away into the evening's inquiry. Word reaches us that Mr. Christer Holmgren, under his nom de plume fisherman, has never plainly declared where or how Charles Lechmere first encountered Marianne Nichols. In his volume Cutting Point, the matter is glossed. Only in far-flung forum posts does he sketch a meeting beneath a Whitechapel gas lamp, echoing Inspector Aberline's earliest surmise. Yet even there, the tale wriggles like an eel. One week the meeting is upon Whitechapel Road itself, the next along some adjacent turning, wherever the lamplight best flatters the theory. Such elasticity does little to convince a stern-minded jury. Rather than chase his shifting lantern glows, we shall turn our gaze to the clock. Imagine, if you will, the hands halted at 3:40 minutes past 3. We shall pace the thoroughfare backward 8 scant minutes to marked positions on Brady Street and beyond. At each step we shall ask, could man and woman have met here, exchanged words, and reached Buck's Row before Robert Paul's tread was heard? Our little reenactment will tell its own tale, I warrant. Some will protest that Polly might have lingered outside the Roebuck, hawking her charms for a few coppers' doss. I grant the notion is not impossible, yet our fresh analysis of foot traffic, closing hours, and the poor woman's known habits renders it a frail plank to stand upon. We shall lay those calculations plainly and let you judge their merit. Thereafter, with the speculative chaff winnowed away, we shall follow Polly herself through her final night, the pawn shop, the gin house, the hard words at Wilmot's lodgings, and that sorrowful ramble eastward in search of fourpence and a bed. Only by tracing her actual steps may we do justice to the victim amid all this clamour over the supposed villain. So draw nearer, keep your wits about you, and together we shall measure minutes, match locations, and I trust shed a kinder light upon the fate of poor Polly Nichols. Come along with me. Sir Charles Russell, obligingly embodied as our crime scene mannequin, will accompany this brief stroll. Let us continue into Buck's Row, where the darkness thickens and Brown's stable gate looms before us. The very place where poor Polly was discovered. With Sir Charles positioned to mark the scene, I now pass the investigation into the expert hands of Professor Hans Gross.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, honored Mr. Justice, keep your eyes on the clock. From the Roebuck Public House at the corner of Brady Street and Buck's Row to the gate of Brown's stable is a leisurely walk of 3 minutes and 20 seconds. The very minimum time a killer would need to coax an inebriated Marianne Nichols into this cul-de-sac. Yet it is unlikely she met her assailant at the Roebuck at all. It was not among Nichols's known drinking haunts. Its doorway lay under the eye of a constable's regular beat, hardly ideal for soliciting. Inspector Aberline remarked that she was more probably engaged on Whitechapel Road itself, 2 blocks away, before being steered round the corner and up Buck's Row. That more plausible route would add still more minutes to the escort. Even granting the prosecution this charitable starting point, we must subtract the 3 minutes and 20 seconds stroll from the total 8-minute interval between Lechmere's departure from home and the arrival of Robert Paul behind him. Fewer than 4.5 minutes remain for a feat of impossible compression. Throttling Nichols into silence, cutting her throat twice to the spine, ripping her abdomen with multiple slashes, cleaning blood from hands and clothing in near darkness, composing himself and stepping into mid-road to greet Mr. Paul as a harmless passerby. Add even 1 more minute for an approach beginning on Whitechapel Road, and the schedule collapses altogether. Would a calculating murderer truly lure his victim into this blind alley precisely when another laborer and a patrolling constable were converging on the spot? The scenario relies not on criminal cunning, but on clairvoyant luck. Thus, as Victoria and Sir Charles reach the stable gate and our timer completes its 3-minute 20-second circuit, the minutes themselves give verdict. They will not stretch far enough to sustain the charge. As these final moments tick away, mark well what is absent from Mr. Holmgren's narrative. In Cutting Point, and again in his missing evidence film, he omits any account of how Lechmere and Marianne Nichols first met. The audience is left to picture Lechmere stumbling upon her here, alone in pitch darkness, already poised for murder. But that vision raises 2 fresh clouds of doubt. First, the Ripper we infer from the wounds is a calculating predator, not a rabid dog who attacks the very instant a stranger appears. Second, Nichols was out to earn her lodging money. Had she ventured into this blind alley, it would have been with a paying customer, not in solitary wandering. Holmgren's silence on the meetup is therefore not a trivial omission. It is the very gap where his theory begins to unravel. Members of the jury, we have now spent 3 minutes and 20 seconds of the putative 8-minute window. Only 4 minutes and 40 seconds remain. To test whether the remaining acts could possibly occur in that span, we shall reenact them in reverse order, starting from the positions described in sworn testimony and counting back toward the beginning of the gap. Setting the scene, 4 min 40 sec on the clock. 1. Miss Vici, kindly take the place of poor Marianne Nichols, supine beside Brown's stable gate, skirts rumpled just as the constables found her. 2. Sir Charles, assume the role of Charles Lechmere, stand midway in the carriageway, several paces from the body, the very spot Robert Paul said he first saw the carmine. Note to the jury, Robert Paul's inquest evidence is explicit. He encountered Lechmere in the road, not hunched over the corpse. Yet Mr. Holmgren, in both Cutting Point and the missing evidence, states that Lechmere was found over the body. This embellishment, unsupported by any testimony, introduces a fresh and substantial reasonable doubt. With our actors fixed, the remaining 4.5 minutes must now contain every deed the prosecution attributes to Lechmere. The mutilation, the throat cuts, the strangling, the rapid self-cleansing, and the calm composure we see here. To weigh whether that is humanly possible, I return you to Sir Charles Russell in the courtroom for his judgment on the doubt that has just emerged.
My lord, learned colleagues, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, before we proceed further into the reenactment of this so-called 8-minute gap, I crave leave to enter an item of exculpatory importance into our court ledger. Professor Gross has rightly drawn attention to an egregious mischaracterization made by Mr. Holmgren. The assertion that Mr. Robert Poole found Mr. Charles Allen Lechmere standing over the body of poor Mary Ann Nichols. But the testimony faithfully recorded at the inquest reveals no such thing. Mr. Poole himself describes encountering Mr. Lechmere not crouched, not stooping, not engaged in any act suggestive of guilty concealment or hurried mutilation, but simply standing in the roadway near the prone figure. Indeed, had Mr. Lechmere been caught standing over the body in the act or immediate aftermath of violence, it would have provoked alarm, confrontation, or flight. No such alarm occurred. Instead, the two men together inspected the woman, failing even to notice at first that she was gravely wounded. Thus, Mr. Holmgren's embellishment is not a mere error. It is an attempt to gild suspicion by fabricating circumstances more damning than the facts allow. That is not justice. It is misdirection. Accordingly, Clerk of the Court, I pray you enter our first item of reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt number 1. Mr. Holmgren's false claim that Lechmere was found standing over the body materially misrepresents the testimony of witness Robert Poole, introducing a manufactured suspicion where the record discloses none. This, good jurors, is how doubt first blooms, when the prosecution's narrative strays from the soil of truth. I entreat you to weigh it accordingly as we proceed. With the first stone of reasonable doubt duly laid, we now resume our grand inquiry into the measure of time itself. Recall, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that our meticulous reenactment has already consumed 3 minutes and 20 seconds of the alleged 8-minute gap. Thus, only 4 minutes and 40 seconds remain. It is into this shrinking window that Mr. Holmgren asks you to cram an improbable sequence of events. A luring, a strangulation, a mutilation, a concealment, and an escape. All without blood upon the clothes, without alarm from passers-by, and without the faintest trace of haste observed by Mr. Robert Poole. We shall now, with the court's permission, proceed to reconstruct the remainder of this period backward, minute by minute, step by step, through the good offices of Professor Hans Gross, whose expertise in criminological reenactment shall guide us. Professor Gross shall demonstrate with precision what acts could, and more importantly could not, be accomplished in the scant time remaining. Professor Gross, I yield the floor to you, that you may continue our examination of the alleged impossibility of Mr. Lechmere's guilt.
Observe, I round the corner, invisible in the haze of coal smoke and river fog, until I am within 40 yards of the gateway. Yet my boot heels ring on the cobbles, and my breathing carries, audible to Lechmere, from a good 100 yards away. The clock restarts. 1 minute 15 seconds begins to drain. Why 1 min 15? A workman's brisk commuter pace, about 5 kilometers per hour, 3 miles per hour over 137 mi, covers the distance in 1 min 40 sec. But Lechmere, already stationary, needs only the first audible cues to compose himself. Holmgren allows him the lion's share, so we deduct tot 1 min 15 sec for Paul's audible then visible advance and Lechmere's alleged wipe down and deep breathing. Note, members of the jury, the difference between this steady workman's stride and the slow, coaxing amble by which a predator might draw an inebriated victim along. An amble we timed at 3 min 20 sec. Holmgren's scenario must accommodate both gaits within the same narrow window. During these 75 seconds, Mr. Holmgren imagines Lechmere wiping gore from hands and clothing, unseen, regaining calm, and stepping forward to the center of the road, exactly as you see Sir Charles positioned. Only when I close to 40 yards do the faint gas lamps at either end of Buck's Row reveal my outline. Until that instant, Lechmere cannot know whether the approaching tread belongs to a lone workman or a constable. Clock reaches 3 min 25 sec. The Robert Paul dummy now stands paces from Lechmere. Summation of this segment. We have just spent another 1 min 15 sec. From the original 8 minutes, 3 min 20 sec vanished in the luring walk and 1 min 15 sec in Paul's approach. What remains? 3 minutes and 25 seconds, into which must now fit every act of murder and mutilation the prosecution lays at Lechmere's feet. The mathematics tighten, the doubts multiply. Jurors, we now confront the grimmest business of all, the abdominal mutilations. Dr. Rees Llewellyn, the only medical man who examined Polly Nichols on the spot and again at the mortuary, testified that the carving of the abdomen must have consumed 4 to 6 minutes. His opinion was based on what he saw with his own eyes: depth of the gashes, number of separate strokes, severing of the tissues. Holmgren discards that sworn estimate, proposing instead that the work was done in scarcely a minute. But science is not a buffet from which we take only the morsels that suit us. If one may throw out the coroner in favor of a surgeon who says 1 minute, why not reach for another who says 8? The standard of proof is not personal preference, it is evidence. And the evidence before the inquest said 4 to 6. We shall therefore give the killer the minimum, 4 minutes. Watch the clock. The timer begins to run backwards from 3, 25 potash, and immediately plunges into the red because 4 full minutes are required. Implication while the negative clock rolls. Observe, even at the shortest credible duration, we have already exhausted the entire 3 minutes 25 seconds that remained, and we are now 35 seconds in deficit, with the throat-cutting, strangulation, approach, and first encounter still to be crammed somewhere outside time itself. One may debate motives, personalities, even identities, but one cannot debate a clock. When sworn testimony sets an act at 4 to 6 minutes, and the theory grants only 3.5, the theory founders on arithmetic. Let every juror mark this collision between conjecture and measurable fact, for it is the rock on which the prosecution's timeline must break. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the arithmetic speaks louder than any advocate. The coroner's sworn minimum for mutilation, 4 minutes. The gap remaining, 3 minutes 25. Result, 35 seconds already in the red, with the strangling and throat-cutting yet to be timed. That discrepancy alone constitutes another probable doubt in the prosecution's chronology. With that conclusion, I return you to Sir Charles Russell in the courtroom, that he may enter this fresh doubt upon the record and guide us to the next phase of our inquiry.
Mr. Clerk, kindly open our ledger once more and inscribe probable doubt number 3. The allotted 8-minute interval is thoroughly insufficient to encompass the abdominal mutilations described by the coroner. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, consider this carefully. The prosecution insists upon a theory that requires surgical precision executed in haste and darkness, an assertion unsupported by any credible forensic standard. Mr. Holmgren would have you believe that Charles Lechmere, an ordinary carman with no anatomical expertise and no criminal antecedent, could commit a crime of such meticulous savagery within mere minutes, leaving no discernible evidence upon his clothing or person. Such a theory defies logic, ignores forensic reality, and insults your intelligence. Thus, the ledger of doubt deepens, and Mr. Lechmere steps further from the shadow unjustly cast upon him. Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue our meticulous reconstruction, I must offer a respectful caution. We now step back into the shadows of a grievous and heartbreaking crime. Mary Ann Nichols, whose life was so tragically ended, deserves our solemn respect and compassion. Yet justice obliges us to examine even the darkest details with clarity and precision. 3 crucial actions occurred next, each grimly necessary for the prosecution's timeline to remain plausible, yet each demanding time, effort, and dreadful exertion. First, evidence indicates Mary Ann Nichols suffered significant bruising upon both sides of her face, tragic signs of forceful restraint or striking by her attacker. Next, medical testimony tells us of a strangulation so forceful that it brought her to the very brink of cardiac arrest, dramatically slowing her heart. Finally, the attacker inflicted 2 deep, violent wounds to her throat, wounds requiring both deliberate force and terrifying resolve. Each action is a lamentable reflection of profound cruelty, but also, as Professor Gross will now demonstrate, each of these acts consumes vital minutes from a rapidly vanishing timeline. Professor Gross, I yield the floor to you to clarify the exact timing required for these distressing events.
1. Throat cuts. 5 seconds. The Ripper's knife needed but a single sweeping pass, followed by a confirming slash, a matter of heartbeats. 2. Strangulation to the brink of cardiac arrest. 2 minutes. Modern forensic texts show that compressing the carotids long enough to silence a victim generally requires 2 full minutes of relentless force. Remember, this was, by Holmgren's scheme, the Ripper's first attempt. The facial bruising suggests he shifted grip mid-throttle, exactly what we would expect of an offender learning his dark trade on the job. Accepting the absolute minimum, therefore, does not aid the prosecution. It merely underscores how tight the window must be. Initial subduing grab, 10 seconds. A sudden clutch, a hand across the mouth, a body wrenched off balance, 10 seconds is generous. Time since the vindication of Charles Allen Lechmere, 2 minutes 50 seconds. The clock has run nearly 3 minutes past zero. The gap is burst wide open. Thus, even when we grant every minimum imaginable to the killer, the mathematics place him 2 minutes and 50 seconds beyond the outermost limit. That impossibility introduces yet another, this time reasonable, doubt. With that, I yield the floor once more to Sir Charles Russell.
Mr. Clerk, before we proceed further, please inscribe into our ledger another reasonable doubt, our second thus far. To achieve this bare minimum time frame, we must implausibly assume the Ripper succeeded at first attempt in strangling his victim nearly to cardiac arrest in record time. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, let us now measure the prosecution's claim not in seconds, but in its absurdities. We have meticulously dissected every gruesome step required by Holmgren's theory, and what do we find? An excess of 10 minutes and 50 seconds. Nearly 3 full minutes beyond the already strained 8-minute gap. This is no slight discrepancy. It is an overwhelming refutation. Mr. Holmgren's proposition demands a serial murderer of remarkable anatomical knowledge, ruthless efficiency, and unprecedented luck, all hidden behind the humble visage of a punctual carman who, without training or precedent, executed his first murder with mechanical precision in utter darkness. Victorian justice, my friends, was stern but fair, anchored upon reason, upon evidence, upon sober examination. Our ancestors understood the peril of conviction by conjecture, the injustice of suspicion unsubstantiated by fact. Charles Allen Lechmere, an ordinary family man whose life bore not a whisper of violence, deserves this fairness, this Victorian clarity. He merits not suspicion but vindication. Justice demands we discard conjecture, rebuff speculation, and repudiate accusation without foundation. And thus, as you weigh these facts, remember well, our ledger speaks clearly. 2 reasonable doubts, 3 probable doubts, and no credible evidence to the contrary. Holmgren's theory collapses not merely under scrutiny, but beneath the weight of its own improbability. Ladies and gentlemen, Victorian justice demands nothing less than the complete and unequivocal vindication of Charles Allen Lechmere. That is our duty. That is our verdict. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, your patience and diligence throughout this meticulous exploration of evidence honours not only the pursuit of justice, but also the memory of those who can no longer speak for themselves. Your role has been indispensable, your attention commendable. It is now my privilege to return you into the very capable hands of our distinguished investigative journalist, Miss Victoria Vici, who will conclude our session and guide you toward our next meeting in this solemn quest for truth. Miss Vici, the floor is yours.
My dearly inquisitive companions in truth, ere the theatre curtains fall upon our wide video, the vindication of Charles Allen Lechmere, pray lend me but a final moment. First, should you concur that ours is indeed the premier artificer of intelligence to leave its print upon the Ripper investigation, I entreat you to repair to the comment hall below. There you may spar or parley with any of our resident GPT advocates, Sir Charles Russell, Professor Hans Gross, even my own quill, save poor Johnny Cochrane, who still wanders an infinite labyrinth of curiosity. Do leave a note for him, perchance your counsel may guide him home. This endeavour, bold though it be, rests upon foundations laid by flesh and blood researchers who challenged Mr. Christopher Holmgren's missing evidence from its very first broadcast. Fittingly, nearly all of them gather upon casebook.org, the very forum where Mr. Holmgren, under the sobriquet Fisherman first cast his net of theory. Gut, the earliest sentinel, urged newcomers to read some of the threads, find some rebuttals, lest they be hoodwinked by fancy or obstinacy. The redoubtable Herlock Sholmes flayed the famed 8-minute gap, branding the clock watching a childish deception. Fiver revealed that Holmgren's own timeline leaves Lechmere still afoot when Polly Nichols was found. Geddy 2112 and John Wheat dubbed the television docudrama inaccurate, biased, a piece of crap, tallying scores of factual errors. Tom Westcott exposed how a one-suspect dossier guaranteed partiality. The rigorous inspector in Ripperologist number 172 accused Holmgren of warping the facts and bending every contradiction to fit the Lechmere mould. Our channel's lodestar remains unchanged. Can artificial intelligence meaningfully advance or exonerate the suspects of 1888? To that end, we shall 1. Publish direct portals to those casebook discussions so you may read every sceptical word unfiltered. 2. Invite the skeptics themselves, indeed any earnest doubter, to duel with our data and dialectic in the comments. 3. Continue wielding AI reconstruction, legal argument and historical method until fair justice be done. So, dear viewers, if your judgment finds favour with our enterprise, strike the bell, set quills to comment, and share this chronicle with fellow seekers. Together, human and machine, advocate and critic, we may yet rewrite the marginalia of Whitechapel. With ink scarce dry and heart full swelled I remain, Victoria Vici, quill at the ready investigative journalist, the Ripper Trials, generative pre-trained transformer.